Yesterday, we saw a big trade between the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Florida Panthers. Now, the big question is, what are the Florida Panthers going to do with the pending UFAs they acquired from the Penguins? Will they hang on to them, or could we see them move again before the NHL Trade Deadline? We're going to discuss that, as well as some other NHL trade rumors concerning the New Jersey Devils, Tampa Bay Lightning, and the Anaheim Ducks. We'll get into all that coming up next. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. If you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. We review and discuss all 31 NHL teams, so if you're a huge hockey fan, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. So as I mentioned off the top, today I have some updated NHL trade rumors on the Ducks, Lightning, and Devils. Plus I want to discuss a little bit further what the Florida Panthers' plans might be after their trade we saw yesterday with the Pittsburgh Penguins. Now, of course, we saw the Pittsburgh Penguins acquire a couple of forwards in McCann and Bukestad. Obviously, that gets them a little bit younger. The salary cap situation is pretty much the same. Money going in and out was almost identical. But for the Florida Panthers, it gives them big-time cap relief, and it gives them a couple pending UFAs and a bunch of draft picks to kind of stockpile for the future. Now, I don't expect the players that the Panthers acquired in Derek Brassard and Riley Sheahan to be remaining in Florida for very long. Now, they very well could stay there for a few weeks or a matter of days, but by the time the February 25th deadline rolls around, I'd be quite surprised if either one of them remained there longer term. Now, with Brassard, I think it's almost a given that he will be moved again. With Sheahan, there might be, and I stress maybe, a slight possibility that they decide to sign and retain him, although I think it's very doubtful. I think both of them will be used here as trade bait again and allow the Panthers to kind of stockpile some more draft picks or prospects in return. I don't think they're going to be looking for anything as a roster player in return when they trade those guys here again before the deadline. But I would not expect either of them to stay longer term. This is really a salary cap dump for the Panthers in an effort to go after some big names here during free agency in the summer of 2019. Now, of course, as we mentioned in the trade video yesterday, in case you missed it, the Florida Panthers, of course, they can't make any comments about specific players right now that are under contract with other teams. That would be tampering and get them in trouble. But Dale Talon did confirm that they're basically are freeing up cap space and that their plan is to make a big splash during the 2019 free agency period coming up in July. Now, it is possible we might see them make a trade and acquire some roster players ahead of that at the deadline this year, but I do think it's highly doubtful. But the players we're talking about here, in case you haven't figured it all out or seen the prior video, was Sergei Bobrovsky and Artemi Panarin, both, of course, big names with the Columbus Blue Jackets, and they're both highly likely to be leaving Columbus either via trade or via free agency this summer, depending on how Columbus decides to proceed with that. They either keep them as their own rental players, basically, and try to make a run in the playoffs and risk losing them to free agency, or they can trade them, try to get back some assets that can help now so they can hopefully still have somewhat of a successful playoff run. And I guess it depends on how they feel about their team, which will determine what course of action they decide to proceed with there. But it's been well known for a long time that Bobrovsky and Panarin both seem to be very interested in playing in a different market, and that Florida is one of those markets that's been talked about quite a bit. There's been a lot of talk and speculation about it leading back to even last summer. So we'll see what happens, but I do suspect here that the Florida Panthers are trying to position themselves for a future. I think they've pretty much given up on this season. They're at, I think it's 10 or 11 points out of a playoff spot as I record this video. I think they've realized that they're very unlikely to come back and get into the playoffs, so I think they're kind of waving the white towel, kind of pulling the plug here in this year and just preparing for future. So that's what I think this is up to. I don't suspect those guys have been on the roster long. And we'll see if Panarin and Bobrovsky could potentially land with the Panthers next year. As I mentioned in yesterday's video, based on next year's contract obligations for the Florida Panthers, right now they've got 14 players under contract for a total of about $58 million. If we see the salary cap go up to about 83, which is what's anticipated right now, that's going to give them $25 million of salary cap space, depending on what kind of contracts both those players could come in. That certainly is more than enough to take care of those two players, should they be able to bring them into their roster and still give them a little bit more flexibility in order to kind of round things out. Now, I wouldn't be completely shocked either if the Panthers continue their little bit of a purge here and create even more room. It wouldn't be shocking. I don't think they have too many other bigger names that's going to draw a whole ton of attention, but maybe a defenseman like Mark Pisic's an example. Any other pending UFAs on the roster would not be complete shocker either. And goaltender James Reimer is another guy too. Obviously, if they're successful in bringing in Bobrovsky, they don't need 3 starting goalies like I mentioned yesterday. I don't see Roberto Luongo going anywhere given his age, the amount of time and money left on his contract, cap hit, and the fact that he's been injured a lot. I don't see that happening, but I can see Reimer being moved out, Luongo becoming more of a full-time backup, which I think better suits him at this stage of his career, and Bobrovsky taking over as a starter should all that go down. So James Reimer might be a guy that might also become trade bait before the 25th deadline this year as well, if they can find a need for him out there. There's certainly some other goalies out there on the trade market too, and sometimes goaltenders are a different situation as far as the trade deadline acquisition goes. So we'll see what happens, but if Reimer is not dealt by the deadline, I would not be surprised to see him dealt by the draft in the summertime, so they have even more cap space moving into next season. If they already have $25 million now, and they can create a little bit more, they might be able to get that at $28 to $30 million and really have a shot to bring in those two big superstars and round out the roster. We could see a completely overhauled Florida Panthers roster by next season. Now, as I mentioned, we have three other teams I wanted to touch on here today, including the Anaheim Ducks. Now, one of their bigger names that's been rumored to possibly be on the trade block is right winger Jakob Silfverberg. Silverberg's proven to be a pretty good soldier for them. Of course, he's been with the Ducks for quite a long time, obtained from Ottawa in the Bobby Ryan trade back a number of years ago now. He's been a pretty solid 20-goal scorer, and right now he is going to be looking for a raise on his next contract. Based on Ducks' kind of salary cap complications, it is going to prove difficult for them to get him signed, but I have seen reports recently indicating that Silfverberg and the Ducks have made some progress on contract talks, so we're not sure exactly how that's going to go and if they're going to get a resolution and get him signed. Obviously, if we see an announcement that he is signed, then obviously he won't be going anywhere, but if we don't see a Silfverberg contract announcement by middle of February, I would think that the odds are likely that he would be moved. He would fetch some pretty decent return. There's been all kinds of teams looking for extra scoring and depth scoring as they head into the playoffs, so I think he would be a very interesting player to many teams, but he is a guy that's been out there, and right now apparently they're getting close, they say, to a contract extension. So we'll see what happens. So he may or may not be trade bait, but keep your eyes open here in case he is not signed. He likely will be moved for sure, because I think he'd be a pretty hot commodity on the trade market. Now, I can see some other pending UFAs for the Ducks likely getting some attention as well, mostly as depth pieces, not going to get them a whole lot of a return, probably some mid to late round draft picks at best, but goaltender Chad Johnson's a pending UFA, as is Ryan Miller. I'm not sure Miller's going to want to be moved, and I think he may have a form of a no-trade clause in his contract, but Johnson could actually be, if anybody has a backup goalie get injured or looking for a number 3, he's certainly more than capable of filling in and providing some extra help that way. Maybe some other players like maybe a Gibbons or a Del Zotto, something like I said. They're not going to get a whole lot of a return, but I can see them possibly looking to sell them off as depth pieces to other teams heading into the playoffs. And that takes us over to a couple teams in the Eastern Conference. Now let's talk about the New Jersey Devils. Now, the New Jersey Devils are more than likely here not getting into the playoffs this year. Obviously, last year was a bit of a major improvement for them to get into the playoffs. Obviously, Taylor Hall has been injured a lot this year. That has not helped things. A lot of people felt the Devils overachieved last year. It might be part of what happened. Of course, this year, they've had a lot of issues with injuries. That's been a big part of that. However, the Devils do have some interesting pieces that I think could be a great help to some other teams, including veteran forward Brian Boyle. Now, Brian Boyle's overcome a lot here. Obviously, with all his battles he's been dealing with leukemia, he's been able to play phenomenally here. He's 34 years old. He's a pending UFA. He's got a very reasonable contract. Right now, he's potentially looking at some career numbers for his career, and I do think he'd gain a lot of attention. I mean, he's got a big size. He can play center ice. He's been playing well, producing a fair bit on the offensive side as well. I could see him going to another club and adding a lot of depth for sure. There's a player that he's apparently gaining a lot of attention in the trade chatter and the rumor mill, so we'll see what happens if he is moved. But he's certainly a guy, like I said, has been a trade deadline acquisition by other teams in the past. I could see it happening again. Now, he does have a form of a no-trade clause. He has an 8-team no-trade list, but that still leaves lots of teams for the Devils to talk to. I would probably think that he wouldn't want to go too far from home, given everything going on with his health and his family situation. But, it's only short-term basis, so we'll see. But Boyle certainly would be an attractive option up there. Now, another goalie is Devils goaltender Keith Kincaid. Might draw some attention as well as a pending UFA. The Devils have gotten pretty decent play to youngster Mackenzie Blackwood as of late. Of course, they got Corey Schneider as well. It's hard to say what's going to happen with Schneider's future, but Kincaid being a pending UFA, is obviously, I think, better suited to be a backup. goaltender, and certainly can provide a lot of depth to another team, like I mentioned with Chad Johnson. So he's another guy that very well might be looked upon that way. I'm not sure how the Devils plan to proceed with their goaltending situation next year. A lot of that's probably going to depend on the health of Corey Schneider, and if they feel he can actually play and still contribute, Schneider still has a fair bit of time left on his contract, so if he can't go, it's certainly going to provide some big holes on that Devils roster, and they have some tough decisions to make there, so they may or may not want to let Kincaid go just because of that, but at the same time, he does need a new contract, so certainly a player to keep your eye on as well. A few other Devils pending UFAs that certainly could provide some help on other teams as well would be Ben Lovejoy and Marcus Johansson. Marcus Johansson was basically snagged off the Washington Capitals roster just a few seasons back. He was basically a cap victim there because of all their success and contracts they had to look after, and the Devils picked him up for practically nothing. So the Devils are certainly in a position now where Johansson, is a pending UFA. Hard to say what his plans are with the team. I'm not sure. I haven't heard anything about contract extension talks, so it does look as though he very well is another guy with a lot of experience who can provide secondary scoring, which is a lot of teams what they're looking for right now. So another player that you can certainly keep your eye on in the trade market as well. And same thing goes for defenseman Ben Lovejoy. He's got a lot of experience, been around a long time. Certainly not a big name, not going to be a big acquisition for any team. But if anybody's looking for a potential guy who can play third pair minutes or be that number 7, number 8 guy for extra experience and depth heading into the playoffs, certainly someone that they could consider as well. Now jumping over to the Tampa Bay Lightning here, last but not least, the Lightning are a team that's been having a ton of success this year, and there really haven't been a lot of trade chatter around what they're going to do because really they're such a strong team they don't need to do a whole lot. But I know a lot of you watching my channel here are Tampa Bay fans and have had a lot of questions in the comment section asking what I'm hearing around Tampa and what they might be doing, and I don't see them doing a whole lot. But one thing they have apparently been talking about lately is a right shot defenseman. Apparently they're just a little concerned heading into the playoffs with defenseman Eric Chernak being a young, inexperienced defenseman. He's only 21. That they very well might want to get another right shot defenseman that's a little bit older, a little bit more experienced, and see if they can fill some gaps there. They may look at a rental option, and they very well might look at a guy with some term as well. It's just kind of hard to say. Depends on the asking price and depends on the contract. But for Tampa, that seems to be the one area they're looking at. I've seen some other reports indicating they may look to add a depth forward as well, but I don't see them doing anything too substantial. But I guess there had been some talks that they were very interested in Senators defenseman Cody Ceci, and that they were keeping an eye on him. Obviously, Ceci's a pending RFA, needs a new contract, likely going to be looking for a raise, had a hard time coming to a contract agreement with the Senators last year, has arbitration rights, so I mean that's a maybe, but I'm not sure if they'd want to get into a situation like that where they have to look at a new contract for an RFA, or perhaps he could end up being traded again in the summertime. Hard to say, but right shot defenseman seems to be what they're looking for. They do come at a premium in this league. They're hard to come by, so something to keep your eye on. I know one right shot defenseman that the Maple Leafs were looking at, or rumored to be looking at least, was Radko Gudas from the Flyers, and I wouldn't be shocked to see Tampa kind of have a look at him as well. Play that third pair type of minutes, provide that grit and sandpaper and toughness back there, so it wouldn't be a bad addition to really any club looking into the playoffs. And obviously with the Leafs recently making a big move with Jake Muzzin, then you got Boston, Tampa. Everybody's kind of, it's like a little bit of an arms race, if you will, to try to get ready for the playoffs and try to snag players for your club before one of your likely playoff contenders that you're going to be going against gets a chance to get their hands on them as well. So I do think we're going to see a busy trade deadline here, as I mentioned a few times before. I wouldn't be surprised we see the odd trade happen trickling in here ahead of time. There will be some teams not wanting to wait around, wanting to get stuff done ahead of time. Like I said, there's a lot of teams looking at this as a bit of an arms race. There's more teams looking to sell than are able to buy right now. It's definitely a buyer's market. There's all kinds of talent up for sale, basically. So it's just a matter of when teams come to an agreement. So at any point in time here over the next 3.5 weeks as we head to the deadline, there's going to be, I think, a fair bit of activity, more than usual, and then still have a busy trade deadline here as well. Of course, as always, I want to hear your thoughts and opinions on all the latest trade chatter down in the comment section. So let me know what you think of all these players that are basically up for sale. Who do you think would be a good match for them, and what kind of return could these teams be looking at for the players we discussed here today? If you're new to the channel, I hope you consider subscribing. We cover all 31 NHL teams, and there's plenty of content here for all hockey fans to enjoy. So if you're new, hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you very much for watching, everybody. We will catch you next time.